Opposition Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Nightcliff Friendly Grocer has always lived up to its name. For many decades, it has been the place for the freshest produce around right here in Darwin. But it's always been much more than that. I have been told by many it is a place where a smile or a kind word or a bit of a laugh is guaranteed. A place that leaves you feeling good, connected and part of a community. Linford and Margaret Fick and their family are responsible for creating this welcoming and much-loved space in the community. Not by chance, but through a deliberate and genuine desire to contribute to the community with their wonderful selection of products, exceptional customer service and flat-out kindness. That's the man that Mr. Fick was. It is the way he will always be remembered. A much-loved husband, father, grandfather, uncle and friend. A successful businessman, a respected industry representative. A cherished member of the Territory community who enriched the lives of so many people around him. This is his lasting legacy. Mr. Fick should still be with us today. There is still his presence at his shop, and he should still be doing what he always did so well with such a genuine passion, care and humanity. But he is not. It is an absence and a loss that will endure for his family and so many in our community. But so will Mr. Fick's incredible legacy. This is what we can continue to remember and celebrate, even as the community mourns his passing. Madam Speaker, I joined with hundreds of other community members at the jetty in Nightcliff last Saturday to remember Linford and to support his family at this terrible time. It was such a beautiful example of what our Territory community is actually about. Kindness, compassion, having each other's back, being ready to lend a hand, to share a laugh or a story, or indeed a shoulder to cry on. It was a privilege to attend and to pay my respects on behalf of my team and I directly to Linford's son, Ben. Sometimes, Madam Speaker, in dark times, it is easy for us to forget that there are so many wonderful things about the Territory. First and foremost, the people who live here, whether you were born here or you have chosen to make the Territory your home. We are so strong when the Territory stands together, and now is no different. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who came to Mr. Fick's aid on that tragic day last week, including those in the shop at the time, the frontline staff who responded to the call, and the many who have supported the family. We know how tough that they will be doing, and we thank them for all of the care and compassion they have continued to grace the Territory with. Finally, on behalf of our Labor opposition team, I pass on my deepest condolences to Margaret and the entire Fick family. I also take this moment, Madam Speaker, to acknowledge other Territory families who have lost a loved one as the result of senseless and violent crimes in the Territory. And unfortunately, Madam Speaker, we know there are many other families who have been impacted in the same way and are still grieving today. Madam Speaker, we send the message that today is also for you and your families. May all of these loved Territorians rest in peace. And I acknowledge Samara Larrity, who is also here at the chamber today. Madam Speaker, our Territory Labor opposition is prepared to support this bill today in line with current community sentiment, expectations that Parliament will work together and not against each other. However, we do have some genuine reservations about how effective it will be in actually strengthening community safety. That would be our number one concern. The concerns that have been backed up by global evidence in the views and those experts in the field. Madam Speaker, my team only received a briefing on this bill late yesterday after 4 o'clock and have only seen the bill itself just physically now in the chamber being handed out at 10:14 a.m. So we are acting in good faith, as I said I would, constructive opposition to work in partnership in Parliament, which is what the Territory expects us to do when it comes to positive things to make a difference for fellow Territorians. Unfortunately, we've had little to no time to consider any of the detail, Madam Speaker. I want to just place that fact on the record. We know that these amendments seek to give more weight to the consideration of community safety, which is why we are supporting in good faith when it comes to bail decisions that are made. We know that courts will also need to apply a second test around whether they have a high degree of confidence a person won't reoffend if released on bail. Currently, courts need to consider a range of factors in bail applications, including any risk that the accused person will commit an offence while on bail, breach the peace or breach the condition of their bail. So effectively, community safety and the risk of reoffending already does exist as a key consideration when it comes to territory bail applications. But, Madam Speaker, we accept what the government has put forward today, that they are seeking to give more weight to these particular considerations through these amendments, which is why we will act in good faith on behalf of Territorians. These amendments also seek to remove custody as a last resort for adults and young people. Prior to just yesterday, Madam Speaker, the Labor opposition was not aware that this extension of the amendment would include young people, and the details that were proposed by the government we had anticipated would happen later in the year to allow us to do our work as members of parliament and, of course, as the opposition, to go through detail and to consult with Territorians and the broader legal fraternity on any changes. Unfortunately, we have not had that time and were not informed yesterday directly by the government that this would occur. It was all through media interviews that we learnt this detail. Madam Speaker, we acknowledge there is a strong sentiment following a spate of recent violent incidents involving people on bail across the Northern Territory, and rightly so. However, rushing through legislation does come at a significant risk, not just for this parliament, but for the impact and unintended consequences that could be seen across the Northern Territory. And we want to ensure that we, as members of parliament, can do our job to the best of the ability that Territorians expect us to do. And again, we will continue to act in good faith on this matter. But the more detail we have, Madam Speaker, the more we can do our jobs in this place to make sure there are better outcomes for fellow Territorians. Doesn't take into account expertise and legal advice or strong existing evidence when it comes to the impact of tougher laws, Madam Speaker, without corresponding prevention, early intervention or rehabilitation measures in the NT. There has been no opportunity afforded to the community of the Territory, the frontline organisations that work in this area, to experts, to victims of crime, to police, the legal fraternity or indeed courts to give their views on whether these changes will have the impact that the government claims that they will, or to be part of the broader conversation about other community measures and safety that is driven with local solutions, and that they should also be considered. Madam Speaker, we will support these amendments today, as I said, but we will make the point strongly that there are many gaps in the government's current approach to community safety, and we know that many in the community agree, and we will continue to be a voice for constructive work in this space. Madam Speaker, the Chief Minister has made it clear in media and, of course, here in the House that her sole focus is on strengthening bail laws and making them the toughest in the country. And she has effectively staked her leadership on it. But sadly, we have already seen the evidence that tougher bail laws on their own are not having the impact on violent crime that the Chief Minister said that they would. Unfortunately, the horrific incident that happened at Nightcliff last week is not an isolated incident in the Territory. Early this month, Mr Trevor Miller was violently assaulted in his own home in Woodruff by a person who was on bail. We have seen a number of other horrifying assaults and horrific incidents involving edged weapons just in the past week alone across the Northern Territory, including Alice Springs. These are incidents that happened after the CLP stricter bail laws came into effect on the 1st of January 2025, the beginning of this year. Madam Speaker, the latest police statistics show that violent crime and domestic violence offences have not gone down. And I note, Madam Speaker, that even yourself on your MLA Facebook page suggested that we may indeed need to consider a rethink when it comes to justice. I agree that we do have to honestly step back to look at the whole picture, to ask whether the current approaches to crime and antisocial behaviour are indeed having an effect for the better, and that the Chief Minister, who promised Territorians that they would, what are her other solutions that she will implore? Preventing and reoffending is certainly part of the short-term solution, and that's why tougher bail laws may help, and again, which is why the Labor opposition is acting in good faith today. But ultimately, this is a band-aid solution, Madam Speaker, one that fails to address the broader systemic issues when it comes to community safety, antisocial behaviour and issues particularly around youth crime. In my first speech to Parliament as the Leader of the Opposition back in October 2024, Madam Speaker, I raised concerns that the CLP government didn't appear to have a plan to prevent offending or to break the cycle of reoffending. Unfortunately, it appears 8 months later that they still do not. Bail laws are only part of the solution. They fix the symptom, not the causes of crime. They do not help in getting offenders back on a good track. It is why we aren't seeing any let-up in crime in the Territory, or particularly violent crimes in the Territory. This is certainly what I hear from people right across the Territory community, including the business and industry community, when I talk to them when it comes to community safety. They acknowledge that some of the measures the CLP government have brought in have helped in the short term, and I congratulate the government for that. But they also know, Madam Speaker, that unfortunately this will not fix the problem in the long term, and that is the real challenge here. Evidence from around the world backs this up. What is the CLP proposing when it comes to more children and young people being imprisoned? When we do not know what support that they will get when they are imprisoned, what is the CLP's plan to make this better for everybody? The CLP simply doesn't seem interested in rehabilitation, investing in programs or justice services other than short-term band-aid solutions. What are their long-term community safety measures? Madam Speaker, we do know, because of all the evidence and what it tells us from around the world, that the vast majority of young people who end up incarcerated do go on to reoffend in their community. Unfortunately, most of these young people enter prison with a history of mental health and cognitive disorders. Prison makes most of those problems worse, and ultimately that makes these young people a greater risk to the community when they are released. In contrast, we have seen massive reductions in youth crime when there is a strong focus on prevention and early intervention, particularly when it comes to locally led programs. Madam Speaker, example of programs like Gibby Gang on Groot Island in my electorate of Arnhem, which was established to support young people who had come into contact with the justice system. It has led a massive 95% drop in youth crime in that community, and particularly when it comes to Anadiliakwa young men between the age of 17 years and 25 years of age. Through this program alone, Madam Speaker, we have seen children and young people connected with local role models, supported to build their own life skills, undertake work experience across the archipelago, including short courses, getting their driver's licence, learning to cook, and learning those routines of work and education. It is this sort of program, Madam Speaker, that builds confidence and pride in those young people and indeed their families, and lets them see another more productive path for themselves rather than a life of crime. I do implore the CLP government to look at investing and expanding these types of programs, Madam Speaker, to get kids excited about a positive future and not one where they see themselves stuck or outsiders see themselves stuck in a escalating criminal behaviour life of crime. There is so much groundwork that has already been done in this space. Madam Speaker, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement has bipartisan support in this Parliament. The CLP government has committed to continuing to implement the measures under this agreement, and I do applaud them for that. And I know there is much work to be done and will continue to offer the Labor's constructive partnership when it comes to that. And I know, Madam Speaker, many people in the Territory community have been asking about Aboriginal leadership when it comes to addressing community safety concerns. And if they go back year on year on year, Madam Speaker, they will see Aboriginal leadership across the Northern Territory has been consistent with their messaging. This is exactly what the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is about. It is about Aboriginal Territorians taking responsibility for and supporting real community-based solutions when it comes to addressing, reducing and stopping crime and antisocial behaviour through programs like Gibi Gang on Groot, the Namalaya Law and Justice Group in Maningrida, the Bugala Traditional Owner Law and Justice Group in Barunga and Woogala community. These programs are focused on diverting young people away from crime and poor behaviour. There is so much more that we could do when it comes to preventing crime in the first place, to intervene early, to address social determinants that lead people down poor choices and indeed a poor pathway when it comes to either being a young offender or an adult offender. It is much, much harder to actually do this work, but our community deserves no less. By all means, do the quick fixes, but also get on with addressing those deeper issues underpinning our unacceptable crime rates across the Territory. The former Labor government laid some of the significant groundwork in this space, but it is a long-term project. It must be the first thing on your mind when you are thinking of how do we make the Territory safer. And I can be the first one to say, Madam Speaker, that it may have not been enough, and we know it wasn't enough. But there is a solid basis there to continue working. We do not need to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. We need to put the politics aside and take on board that existing evidence-based programs, those approaches that are community and solutions focused, to keep building on these foundations if we are ever to see long-term change in the Territory. As well as focusing on intervention and prevention initiatives, Madam Speaker, we encourage the CLP government to continue with a strong and sustained focus on building more and better housing, roads and other infrastructure, as well as delivering services out bush and in regional areas to improve the living conditions of fellow Territorians and reduce the need for people to travel where they don't need to travel. This is a significant investment that has been already committed, and the CLP just needs to continue with it. Supporting the work and investment of the Federal Labor Government in delivering more meaningful training and employment opportunities in our regional areas and our remote and very remote areas, particularly when it comes to the 3,000 jobs for the Territory. Rolling out the record investment in education that our former Labor government secured for the Territory in partnership with the Federal Labor Government, because we know education is the tool to get people into a right track and, of course, to lead to a better life. Madam Speaker, rolling out domestic violence funding to the sector and making sure partnerships are positive and working and constructive, and allowing the experts, the DV sector, to address the terrible scourge of domestic, family and sexual violence in the Northern Territory. Teaching respectful relationships and other positive behaviours to put a stop to cycles of crime and violence, particularly when it comes to domestic violence. Identifying and getting the right support to vulnerable families that need help with substance abuse, mental health issues, and particularly from a remote perspective, which is very challenging, and those other key areas when it comes to health, Madam Speaker, in order to stop them from being contributing factors of this outcome we are seeing right now in the Territory. We want to ensure that there are constructive solutions to ensuring that all members of our community can be positive and contributing members of society. Madam Speaker, before the election, the CLP said they had plans to tackle the root causes of crime. For example, they said they were going to set up boot camps for at-risk young people, but all of them seem to have dropped off the radar so far. We'd be very keen to hear what the update is on that. Madam Speaker, we need to see the CLP government focused on investing in crime prevention, in community policing, in youth diversion, in tackling domestic violence and substance abuse. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, The government has stopped talking about all of these things, let alone taking action on any of them. And there just doesn't seem to be a plan beyond more bail laws. Madam Speaker, recent violent incidences involving offenders on bail demonstrate that there are much bigger systemic issues that are at play that are not being adequately dealt with across the Territory. There are currently more people on remand in our prison system than convicted criminals. This means, Madam Speaker, 2 in every 3 people in our corrections facilities are on remand. This means people are waiting for their matters to be heard, Madam Speaker. It means more victims of crime are left in limbo, unable to have their day in court or to see their perpetrator face the consequences of their actions. We've heard, Madam Speaker, that a few weeks ago, prisoners on remand hit that peak 60% of the prison population. It is currently taking, on average, 461 days for a Supreme Court matter to be finalised, hence the skyrocketing numbers in remand. Cases are being further held up because the prisons are so overcrowded. Lawyers and legal services cannot access their clients, and it is often difficult to free up corrections officers to escort people to court in time to meet with their lawyer or prepare for their matter ahead of their hearings. Thus, the pipeline continues to be backlogged. Madam Speaker, there are signs of a justice system and correction system who are under enormous strain, who are starting to become at breaking point. A system unable to keep up with the cases that are before it. A system that effectively poses further safety risks for the community because they are overburdened. This isn't new information, Madam Speaker. Legal experts and others involved in the system have been saying this for months. We need to see violent offenders facing the consequences for their action much sooner, rather than being left to pose further risk to the community. And Madam Speaker, in the tragic Nightcliff incident, the alleged offenders' prior charges should have been finalised much earlier, most likely resulting in them being in a prison sentence. Victims of crime are also being left in limbo, Madam Speaker, waiting for justice and carrying on additional emotional burden that they should never have to bear. If the Chief Minister is truly serious about keeping Territorians safe and violent offenders off our streets, she should have no hesitation in supporting this measure that ensures offenders are dealt with sooner and that justice is delivered for victims. This needs urgent attention and investment, and we will support the government if they focus on this. Madam Speaker, there is only one thing we can learn from the senseless death of Mr. Fick, and it is this: we are stronger when we stand together and when we support each other. This is what the community expects of their Territory politicians. They want to see us coming together, working on solutions, challenging each other in a productive way, and ensuring that we can meet those challenges that face our community. We're all part of this Territory community, and the crime and bad behaviour impacts all of us. And together we do need to stand up to it. And I don't make these comments for just the sake of opposition or to play politics, Madam Speaker. We're beyond that now. I make them because I'm genuinely concerned that the missing pieces of the puzzle when it comes to addressing crime and poor behaviour are not being put together by the government. As the Acting Police Commissioner said himself, and others in the field in fact too many times, we cannot arrest our way out of this problem in the Northern Territory. We need to put as much focus on early intervention and diversion for young people, getting them away from a life of crime, as we do on the acute end. Madam Speaker, if young people face court, we need to ensure that they are getting assessments and treatment, addressing and maybe even for the first time discovering some of those key health or cognitive issues, underlying issues that may have been faced for years and years without anyone's care or knowledge. This isn't about being soft on perpetrators. It's about doing all we can to ensure we stop people from going down a life of crime in the first place. It is now the time, Madam Speaker, for everyone to work together to address community safety and challenges that we face in a partnership manner. We all have a role to play here, Madam Speaker, and particularly the eyes on the Parliament today, but also in supporting those systems that need to be improved or invested in, like the judiciary, like the legal community, into our police, those frontline workers, those domestic and family violence prevention workers, elders in our community, those organisations at the front line who work on community solutions, everyone. We are stronger when we work together. And Madam Speaker, from everything that I've learnt about Linford, I'm sure he would want that too. Madam Speaker, we thank the government for bringing forward their amendments. Again, we are acting in good faith, only just seeing the physical bill today, this morning, during the reading of the Chief Minister. So we will act in good faith, Madam Speaker, because Territorians deserve that.